Hello everyone, Todd Shellnut here with CFI Pro Courses, and this episode is going to be specifically aimed at a very common question I get, which is how do I present or how do I talk about certain subjects on the check ride? Now, over the years I've been doing this, I think I have got this down to very specific techniques. As a matter of fact, it's 4 specific teaching techniques or presentation techniques on the check ride, which I think if you know prior to the check ride, it makes it a lot easier for you to make sense of what you're doing. So let's look at the 4 presentation or teaching styles on the CFI check ride. Here we go. So the first style or method that we'll use is the one that we use to actually teach the FOI portion or fundamentals of instructing. And when you look at this particular method, there's one thing that you have to understand. One is this will not be something that you'll actually be just teaching on the check ride. The reason for is because you're not even able to teach this to anyone until you've actually been an instructor for 24 calendar months at minimum. And yes, there are some stipulations for other ones for 141, but I'm not talking about that, so don't hold me to my feet to the fire about the stipulations that can be other ways. Don't worry about that. But how do you teach the FOIs? Well, you're not really going to be teaching them. You're going to be explaining how you use them as a flight instructor. Now, my way, if you've watched my FOIs videos on this particular subject, you know I have this particular way of called storytelling. I'm not going to go over that with you. You can go back and look at some of my other videos and see what I mean by storytelling. But you're explaining to the examiner how you're going to use these skills to actually be a good CFI. So if I'm looking at this one part here, it says definitions of human behavior. Why is it important that you know the definition of human behavior as a flight instructor? Or human needs. Why is it important for you as a flight instructor to understand human needs and motivation? And you want to be able to go down for each one of these lines and explain to someone why is it important that you know this as an instructor, and probably have a little story to go along with it. Maybe something that happened to you as a student where you think this came into play, or how you expect to handle these things in the field as an active flight instructor. The second style that we're going to talk about is the technical subject areas. Now, the technical subject areas, I think, are probably one of the more difficult ones to go through. And the reason for it is because this is really kind of based off an old way of asking questions. This document is kind of historic in nature right now as we work towards bringing out the Airman Certification Standards for Flight Instructor later this year. And what you want to do is be able to go down the list one by one and talk about each item on the list. Now, I will tell you this, that some examiners will go above and beyond, and they will always try to make sure that no matter what you're teaching, that you have the greatest extent of knowledge. They're going to test to the greatest extent to ensure that they feel comfortable with the knowledge that you have. And is that fair? Absolutely, that is 100% fair. But they can't go into detail about certain types of things that wouldn't be aligned with the standard. So if you're in doubt about that, get with the examiner. I know I've heard horror stories. I remember one time someone said, yeah, this examiner up in Washington State wanted to know the diameter in American wire gauge, AWG, of the P lead coming off the magneto. And I'm like, that absolutely is stupid. Why would they need to know that? Nobody needs to know that. Heck, even mechanics don't even need to know that. They just buy the part and there it is. I don't know. Maybe you can make a P lead for a magneto, but I don't have to know that because I'm just a pilot. I'm not a maintenance person, so I don't really care about the thickness of a P lead. So anyway, things like that. So when you're looking at aeromedical, right? Let's look at this. So can you talk about how to obtain an appropriate medical certificate? Sure you can, right? So you're like, you know what, Todd? I think I can explain that to an examiner, and I also think I can explain it to a student. So what's the deal? Brand new student comes in off the street. They walk into the flight school. They go, hey, I want to start flight training. What do I need to do? And you say, hey, well, you got to get a medical. Well, how are you going to get the medical? And then you start talking about how a brand new pilot would get a medical. And you're going to keep going on down through these lines one by one. But remember, some of these lines have more than one thing to answer. If we go down to line 3 here, you can see that for hypoxia and hyperventilation and all the rest of these things, you have to know the causes, the symptoms, the effects, and the corrective action of the following factors. All right, so that's for every one of those, it's 4 items that you have to know for each. Maybe it's better just to lay out a grid at first when you're studying them. That way you can actually see, hypoxia, and then 4 columns, and then put the causes, the symptoms, the effects, and the corrective action when you're studying it. And that way you can talk about all of this information. Now, again, once you talk about all this information on the same at the same time with the examiner, that doesn't mean that the examiner can't ask you more questions in regards to how this happens. Because remember, the examiner is tasked with evaluating you to the fullest extent possible to make them feel comfortable with, do I feel good about having this person go out and instruct someone? Do I think they would do a good job? Let's look at the third type or style of instruction that you would do on the check ride. So this one would be relating to how you would discuss and present logbook entries and certificate endorsements. Now, there is another task that goes very, very closely along with Task Mike, Area of Operation 2 Task Mike, and it's Area of Operation 3 Task A, and we'll look at that here in just a second after this. Normally, these two things are very closely examined together when you kind of explaining logbook endorsements. Sometimes you'll actually explain the items that are in Area of Operation 3 Task A, but let's look and see what it wants you to do. So it says, what are the required logbook entries for instruction given? So remember that when you're talking about logbook entries, you're not teaching. You're actually, at this particular point, telling the examiner or explaining, okay, you're exhibiting knowledge of the elements related to logbook entries by describing, I said, let's use that word, describing required logbook entries for instruction given. So this particular one is where you would simply just go and, all right, so you talk about required logbook entries for instruction given. So, out in my PTS, I just have right out beside it all the answers, basically. So I'll have 6151 is how I know to what things to put in the logbook. And then 61189 says if I'm going to provide this training for a certificate or a rating, then I actually have to sign the logbook. And then as an examiner, I could ask questions about that. Like, hey, if you and I go flying and in your airplane, do you have to sign my logbook if you were just letting me fly around a little bit? Hey, do you want to fly around a little bit and you let me hold the yoke? Do you have to sign my logbook? Which, of course, the answer is no. And then you go down the line and you start answering the rest of these things or describing each one of these things. What are the required student pilot certificate endorsements, including appropriate logbook entries? Well, we don't have student pilot certificates anymore that you sign. So you have to actually do away with this word required student pilot. You have to mark out the word certificate because you don't write on the back of the student pilot certificate anymore like we used to when it was made of paper, okay? So it's required student pilot endorsements, including appropriate logbook entries. And that is your Tim Loves Bacon on Pizza Plus 1, 2, 3. And if you're not familiar with that, you can go look into some of my other videos and I'll explain it. And then you go into talking about that. All right, so you can kind of get the gist here going through Mike. Here's the one thing that you have to understand about talking about when we're talking about Task Mike and working through these on the check ride. Do you have to know it? Yes, you have to know the information, and especially memorizing this and acronyms and stuff really helps. But examiners are very curious people, and they just want to know why. Well, you see you had to give the 87 Bravo endorsement for the pre-solo written. Why? And then you have to explain to them why you must give that endorsement, which is, one, it's required by regulatory guidance and advisory circular 6165. And, why do we have to do this? Well, we're testing them. We need to make sure they understand the airspace and the regulations. They have to understand about the airplane they're going to be flying. And, so be prepared to tell the why that you must actually give these endorsements. Now, real quick, I'm just going to slide right down here to Area of Operation 3, Task A, and you can kind of see here what I'm talking about, the training requirements for the issuance of a REC private or commercial pilot certificate. So if you're talking about the requirements for Area of Operation 2, Task Mike, logbook entries, you would basically be talking about the same thing, right? But the training requirements, and then boom, you issue the endorsement at the end. So I find that when an examiner is asking questions about the training requirements, that also would cover Task A as well. And there's a lot of redundancy questions like required entries in a pilot logbook for flight record, which was the number one question on our previous task, Area of Operation 2, Task Mike. And so this is the third way, which is you're basically just going through the motions and you're explaining or describing exactly how we're going to be doing this. Now, let's take a look at the fourth and final way that you'll be presenting information to the examiner during the oral portion of the check ride. All right. So this is the fourth and final way that you'll be doing this, or style that you'll be doing this, and that is the pre-flight lesson on a maneuver to be performed in flight. This is where you're going to have to talk about a particular maneuver. And here's the thing that I want you to understand. This task is asking you for only 4 items here. So it's asking you to state the purpose, give an accurate, comprehensive oral description, including the elements and common errors, use instructional aids as appropriate, and then describe the recognition, analysis, and correction of common errors. Now, I'm kind of crazy. I like to look at things from a different standpoint. I don't like the way this is laid out. I like to go 1, 3, 2, 4, and you're going to see exactly why I like to be able to discuss it like that. And it's actually incredibly simple. How many of you have heard of something called an objective statement? Objective statement, I'm pretty sure you're writing a lesson plan, you've heard an objective statement, but every single time you start talking about a maneuver, you have to start off with the objective statement, and that's the reason why the pilot's got to learn it. So the first words out of your mouth should state the purpose, and that's going to say, okay, today we're going to do slow flight, and the reason why we have to do a slow flight is this, and you describe it, and you give your objective statement inside of that first initial conversation. Now, once you do that, you're going to grab your marker and you're going to go up to the board or whiteboard, or you're going to pull out a piece of paper and your pencil. And when you do that, or whatever you're going to use, you pull out your little airplane, whatever you're going to do, you've just satisfied number 3. So if you just state the objective, state the purpose, and then bring out your little plane, or go to the whiteboard, or bring out your piece of paper, you're going to do it, you've literally satisfied 50% of this task. Now, the only thing you have to do is give that accurate, comprehensive description, and then also describe the recognition analysis, which is really like, how would you understand that a student's making these errors? Now, here's where it's going to get extremely simple for you, and you're going to love this one. Let's look at a maneuver. Let's compare these 4 items to what the actual PTS gives you to look at during these maneuvers. So what we're going to be looking at is, I'm just taking just a random one here. It's the normal and crosswind takeoff and climb, okay? First off, I need you to understand that on this particular task, sometimes they have 3, other times they have 4, but the ones with 4 items, you can see here, there's 1, 2, 3, and 4. 3 and 4 says demonstrate and simultaneously explain a normal crosswind landing from an instructional standpoint, and 4 says analyze and correct. Sounds kind of familiar? Well, it's what you actually have to do in the oral, but 3 and 4 are actually designed to be done in the airplane. So we really just need to look at number 1 and number 2. And here's what I want you to understand about that. Number 1 is all of the elements. This is the elements of the normal and crosswind takeoff and climb. And number 2 is the common errors related to that normal crosswind and climb. And here's the next point. if you look at the items in one A through echo, and you get two A through echo, normally the items in line 2 are like the anti-item of line 1. Like, for instance, line E here says that you need to talk about proper use of a checklist. And so you can imagine what would be the anti of proper use, improper use, or proper use of a checklist. Well, I just actually said it myself. The anti of that would be, well, you guessed it, improper use of a checklist. So when you're talking about how to do the maneuver and you're talking about these particular points, just simply just go right then and just talk about the common error. So, the bottom line is when we're doing these takeoffs and go-arounds, we want to make sure we have the checklist completed. And so one of the common errors that I see a lot when I'm working with students, well, they're not using their checklist correctly and at the proper time. And that's how I would say that in the oral portion of the check ride. And so that would actually cover, if you go back to area of operation 4, and you look at the 4 things it's asking, this would be line 2 and line 4 would cover what you're actually talking about right here, just in the first 2 elements of these tasks. So this is the 4 different teaching methods, or presentation methods, if you want to call them, of the CFI check ride, oral portion only. And I think if you try to wrap your head simply about how you're going to talk about these things, I think you're going to be highly successful on your check ride. I'm Todd Shelnut with CFI Pro Courses. If I did a good job today, will you do me a favor and give me a like? And if you're not, can you go ahead and subscribe? I've got a lot of great content coming out in 2023. I'd love for you to be here and share with me. Click that little bell for future notifications. I promise you won't be disappointed in the product. And you know what? If I'm not doing a good job, give me a thumbs down and go ahead and pop some comments in there about how I can improve. I'm always looking to do a better job, and I'm here solely to make sure that you're not really struggling too hard, because I want you to see how easy a lot of this stuff is. You just need a good teacher. I'm Todd with CFI Pro Courses. Talk to you next time.